In terms of what was requested, very significant changes have been made.
I thank the Lord Chancellor for his statement, and we now move on to a statement. I'll just wait for the removal company. Statement, Secretary of State Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is this government's policy that the UK does not recognise self-identification for the purpose of obtaining a gender recognition certificate. However, this government is determined that everyone should be able to live their lives free from unfair discrimination. We are proud to have passed the Same-Sex Marriage Act and Turing's Law. We also introduced a modernised and affordable gender recognition process while recognising the need to maintain checks and balances. Today, we are laying an order to update the list of approved overseas countries and territories for parliamentary approval. This is provided for under Section 11B of the Gender Recognition Act and follows previous periodic updates. This is long overdue. The list of approved overseas countries and territories was last updated in 2011. A commitment was made to keep the list under review. So this is a further step in implementing our response to the Gender Recognition Act's 2004 consultation. We are doing this because there are some countries and territories on the list who have made changes to their systems and would not now be considered to have similarly rigorous systems as the UK. Inadvertently allowing self-ID for obtaining GRCs is not government policy. It should not be possible for a person who does not satisfy the criteria for UK legal gender recognition to use the overseas routes to do so. We also need to ensure parity with UK applicants. It would not be fair for the overseas routes to be based on less rigorous evidential requirements. This would damage the integrity and credibility of the process in the Gender Recognition Act. We have finalised details of overseas countries and territories to be removed and added to the list laid today via an affirmative statutory instrument. We have undertaken thorough checks in collaboration with the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office to verify our understanding of each overseas system in question, to then measure it against the UK standard route to obtain gender recognition. My officials and I have formally engaged with colleagues and ministers from devolved governments in advance of laying this statutory instrument. The government is committed to ensuring that this outcome of the Gender Recognition Act consultation from 2020 is followed through and upheld, and the overseas list will be updated via statutory instrument more regularly in future. This work is important because of the complex interactions between the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act. The complexity of the legal situation has been reinforced by the judgment in December 2022 by Lady Justice Haldane in the judicial review brought by 4 Women Scotland, upheld on appeal last month by the Inner House of the Court of Session, which effectively stated a gender recognition certificate changes a person's sex for the purposes of the protections conferred by the Equality Act. Labour's 2004 Gender Recognition Act and 2010 Equality Act did not envisage that the words sex and gender would be used as differently as they are today. This is having an impact on all policy that draws on these acts, including tackling conversion practices and guidance for gender questioning children. To that end, I'm exploring how we can rectify these issues across the board and provide legal certainty. This will reduce the tensions that have emerged as a result of the confusion around the terms sex and gender. First, by ensuring that we are evidence-led in the approach we take. For example, when considering appropriate treatment of children on the NHS, we should be fully informed by the final report from the CAS review, which is due early next year. Given the complexity of this area, the review is understandably taking longer than originally expected. Second, by ensuring consistency in how we implement policy across the board. And third, exploring if we need more clarity in law. For example, the Equality and Human Rights Commission has recommended that we clarify the definition of sex in the Equality Act, while ensuring that any further legislation that is proposed fully takes into account the complexity of issues. We should not leave ordinary people to suffer unintended consequences because we in Parliament are shy of dealing with difficult issues. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Annalisa Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Minister for Women and Equalities for advance sight of her statement. I welcome this chance to respond to the Minister on these important issues. Such opportunities are vanishingly rare, given this is the first oral statement I believe she's made on the Women and Equalities brief this year. Like Santa Claus, it seems she gets to work when Christmas is around the corner. Indeed, I started this morning by joining a debate on the government's continued failure to ban conversion practices, a promise that was made over half a decade ago. I was sorry to not see the Minister there to explain that failure in person. No conversion practices ban, no commitment to making every strand of hate crime an aggravated offence, to tackle the staggering rise in violent hate crime that's targeting LGBT+ people, and no provision to schools of the guidance that has been promised repeatedly but not delivered. She's been unable to deliver in any of those areas, and today she even tried in a statement to say that legislation passed over 13 years ago has caused these delays. She couldn't make it up. Let's be clear. There are millions of British LGBT+ people in this country, and I would love to hear from the Right Honourable Lady what she's doing for them after her government ditched its LGBT action plan, disbanded its LGBT advisory panel and frittered away taxpayers' money on a cancelled international conference that LGBT+ organisations refused to attend. Now, of course it's important that the list of approved countries is kept up to date. That was what Labour provided for when we passed the GRA back in 2004. The list was last amended in 2011, when 2 countries were removed from it and 9 added. At that time, the government said, and I quote, "It expects it will be necessary to update this list within the next 5 years." Here we are 12 years later, and the Minister's just got around to it, the kind of timescale that our country's grown used to when it comes to Conservative delivery. Indeed, even she herself said it's long overdue. Now, the Right Honourable Lady has outlined several changes today, and it's important we understand fully why these decisions have been made. Why is there so little information provided here on why these decisions have been taken? As just one example, as I understand it, Germany approved self-ID this summer, but it's still on the list. Is that because their changes apply to birth certificates rather than to having GRCs, because they don't have such a certificate? Or is it because of the timing of their reforms? There's no clarity here. There's no information. We're talking here about likely very small numbers of people, but for those individuals, getting this right is important, and it's extremely difficult to determine the Department's approach on the basis of an extremely thin explanation. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, many people living in this country who hold GRCs from the overseas route will be worried about what this means for them. Can the Minister be clear? Do these changes impact in any way on their rights? And what about those with applications which are still outstanding? Also, as a result of these changes, many countries which are close allies of the UK have been removed from the list. Can the Minister explain whether she's had bilateral discussions with each of them over the implications of this move? She referred to thorough checks, but not to any bilateral engagement. Does that mean that none took place? And if so, why was there no such engagement on an issue which I would suspect we as the UK would expect to be consulted were the shoe on the other foot? On that note, what assessment has she made of the impact of this on the mutual recognition of UK GRCs in other countries? Did she consult her newly appointed colleague in the other place, the Foreign Secretary, about the diplomatic impact of these changes? If so, does he agree with them? I note, for example, that China is now on the approved list, but not our 4 closest Five Eyes allies. She also mentioned that there was consultation with the Scottish and Northern Irish authorities, but she didn't say what the upshot of this was. She also did not indicate what the impact of this is on our arrangements with Ireland either. Please, can she clarify this? And finally, changes to the rights of foreign nationals in this country may lead to wider concerns about the mutual recognition of marriage rights and other rights such as adoption. Will the Minister also clarify whether the Government has any plans in these areas as well? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me be clear. Labour wants to modernise the Gender Recognition Act while making sure that does not override the single-sex exemptions in the Equality Act. And we recognise that sex and gender are different, as the Equality Act does. But I'm afraid the Minister's speech today only underlines how chaotic her government's approach has become, with the Conservatives apparently completely divided on these issues and focused on rhetoric rather than delivery. LGBT+ people deserve better.
Secretary of 8.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it's extraordinary that the Honourable Lady would say that the Conservatives are divided on this issue. I would ask her whether the member for Canterbury agrees with her and the disgraceful way that she has been treated by members of the Labour Party, I think, shows that we beg to differ. We are united on this side of the House. They are not. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady has asked quite a number of questions, and I will take the time to go through them in sequence. First of all, she complains that this is the first time that she's hearing me give a statement on this. The fact of the matter is, I'm in this House for oral statements, and there's plenty of opportunity to question. The Minister for Equalities is also in Westminster Hall. But one of the things I'm very keen to do is to stop the Labour Party from using this issue as a political football. They have messed this. They laugh, Mr. Speaker. They laugh, Madam Deputy Speaker. But it was Labour Party MPs who stood on a platform during the debacle over Section 35 with an attempted murderer on stage complaining about this government. So I refuse to countenance any criticism for them. They have messed around so much on this issue. The Honourable Lady claims that Labour has a policy on gender recognition. It is the policy we announced 3 years ago, hollow, empty, repetitive, and has shown that they have done absolutely no work whatsoever on this issue. So let's take her questions. In turn. She asks, why is it that countries like Germany have been removed from the list? And
it's not possible to intervene. She's answering the statement. Secretary of State.
Thank you. Well, that's certainly fine. So she's questioning why certain countries are on the list and others are not on the list. And I heard, again, lots of laughter from members on the backbenches. I'm going to have to reinforce this really important point. This is not a tool for foreign policy. This is not a tool for foreign policy. This is a tool that is used to make sure that other countries' systems are as rigorous as ours. I understand why people will have concerns, but this is not about virtue signalling which countries we like or which countries we don't like. Far from it. This is about whether another country's system meets our guidelines. So she talks about countries like China. It's a very, very good question, and I will explain to her why some countries, which we might not expect, are on the list. I will use the example of Kazakhstan, where to obtain gender recognition, applicants must undergo gender reassignment surgery. This includes forced sterilisation, something which we condemn completely. It is banned in our country and is a form of conversion practice. Recognising certification for someone who has undergone that is a compassionate acknowledgement of what some transgender people in other countries have had to go through to obtain their certification. Are we really going to send people with GRCs from China or Kazakhstan who've been forcibly sterilised by their state that we don't think they're serious about legally changing their gender? Of course not. So that is why we have included certain countries, because if people have gone through such extreme measures for gender recognition, we should not be giving them any additional issues here. For other countries who we worked very closely with, we did carry out quite a lot of extended engagement. I'm also the Secretary of State for Business and International Trade. I work with embassies across the world. I work with ministers across the world. I did speak to other country ministers about this. They recognise the sovereignty of the UK. Ambassadors have been notified. We did this with a lot of collaboration with the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office throughout this process, and we are monitoring the international reaction to this legislation. So please be assured that diplomatic posts have been notified of the changes we have provided them with comprehensive question and answer documents that address any potential misconceptions of what this statutory instrument does. But it goes back to the point I was making about why I am very, very careful with the interventions that I make on equalities. Because Labour do not do their homework. They stand up here with repetitive lines off social media. They think that this is an issue which they can use LGBT people as a shield for silly policy. We are going to do the policy properly. We're taking a lot of time to do this right. The Minister for Equalities and I are keen to ensure that LGBT people across the UK understand that this government is looking after them and making sure that we are doing things in a way that will not collapse once it makes contact with reality.
Elizabeth Truss.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I congratulate my right honourable friend on her statement, and also agree with her that there does need to be more clarification in the law around sex and gender. That is why later this afternoon I will be presenting a private member's bill to do just that. First of all, it will be clear that single-sex spaces and sex, as defined in the Equality Act, is on the basis of biological sex. And secondly, what it will do is protect the under-18s for undergoing hormone treatment for gender dysphoria. It will also make sure that the state doesn't formally recognise social transitioning for the under-18s. Given what my right honourable friend has said, will the government back my bill?
I thank my right honourable friend for her question, and I certainly support any effort to clarify the law, and we should start from first principles. No child is born in the wrong body, and no child should be put on a pathway towards irreversible medical transition. I am also conscious that it will take time to amend law, and therefore I'm focused on what is going to work for now. And that is why we are publishing guidance to give clarity to schools as soon as possible. But I must say, I do remember discussing this growing problem of what we describe as social transitioning with my right honourable friend when she was Minister for Women and Equalities. And I'm keen that she has come to my point of view. I'm very keen to work with her on this to see how we can make sure that this works properly in practice.
SNP spokesperson Kirsten Oswald.
Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance sight of her statement, although I would have welcomed a good deal more detail. I do have to say, whether it is the UK Government being missing in action on its own commitments to ban conversion therapy 5 years on, or now this, they do seem much more interested in culture wars than in looking after the rights of some of the most vulnerable. And of course, this is the same UK Government intent on blocking the democratic will, the cross-party expressed democratic will of the Scottish Parliament, again more interested in constitutional shenanigans than human rights. I wonder if she can tell me, she talked about unintended consequences. Has she undertaken an impact assessment of how this change will affect the safety, the health and the well-being of those affected? Can she say what conversations specifically she has had with international counterparts, and what specific evidence she received ahead of this change that made her decide to remove these named territories? Can she outline exactly what will happen to those already living here and living under their new gender who come from the places she's now removing from the list? And can she say where this now leaves the notion of reciprocal arrangements? What of those from the UK living elsewhere? Does she recognise that the UK is travelling rapidly backwards on the rights of LGBT people, and that this decision is very much out of step with other progressive countries around the world? What consideration has she given to the UK's international reputation? From sending vulnerable refugees to Rwanda, from placing barriers in front of care workers who want to come into the UK, and now this, the dearth of compassion at the heart of the UK Government is writ large. And of course, we've all heard the reports that the Conservative Party intends to fight the general election on the trans debate and culture wars. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, nobody's identity should be in question. As she herself said, nobody's identity should be used as a political football. We need to stop that. She needs to reflect, and she needs to change tack.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I completely disagree with the Honourable Lady. She talks about us using this issue as culture wars football, yet the Labour opposition say this is the first time they've heard us say anything about it in the House. Surely both cannot be true. I think it is extraordinary. I think it is extraordinary that she is telling us that we are not compassionate. It is her government in Scotland that was allowing rapists to be housed in women's prisons while using self-ID as a cover. So I will not accept that. We are the ones who are thinking about women's rights. We are the ones who are thinking about safeguarding. We are the ones who are thinking about vulnerability. She asks me about reciprocal arrangements. The fact is that our system is a lot more rigorous, so there is no reason for others to stop accepting our citizens certificates because they have not changed. It is because other countries have changed their process that we are updating this. We cannot be in a situation where we have rules for people in this country and we allow people from other countries with different rules to be able to access things that people in the UK cannot access. This is about equality before the law. This is about parity. So reciprocal arrangements will be fine. She asked about people already living here. This is not retrospective legislation, so it's not going to impact people who are already here. We're just making it clear. Self-ID is not something that this government supports. We do not believe that this is something that people should just declare because it creates the very same problems which she saw in Scotland at the Isla Bryson case of rapists going into women's prisons. We are not going to allow that to happen on this government's watch.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
Madam Deputy Speaker, of course you cannot change biological sex, and the GRC establishes legal sex for the purpose of exercising certain rights. Now, given that we've had a massive shift in rights since the Act was passed in 2004, particularly same-sex marriage, could my right honourable friend advise me exactly what additional rights are granted through the giving of a GRC?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. This is one of the areas where we're trying to provide clarity. Because of the Haldane judgment, there is now confusion between biological sex and legal sex, and certainly in terms of the interpretation which people put on it. So a gender recognition certificate certainly had different standards in terms of what you could obtain until this judgment. We want to make clear, for instance, that single-sex spaces are still going to be protected. We're going to be doing a lot more in order to clarify that. The Haldane judgment changes that. And that is one of the reasons why we need to look very carefully. There were 30 pages in the report, in the appeal court report, shows how complex this issue is. The law is no longer clear. In fact, I would go so far as to say the law is now a mess because of changing times. We need to provide clarity. We cannot assume that the wording as was intended in 2004 or 2010 still works in 2023. And we are carrying out work in order to fix that.
Just to confirm, I will only be taking those who were here at the start of the statement. They will know if they weren't, so I expect that they won't stand. Sir Ben Bradshaw.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, not wishing to be upstaged by the ex-Home Secretary, the Minister whose job it is to defend vulnerable minorities chooses to make her first statement this year in this House to announce 2 measures attacking transgender people. Why does she think that the UK, which was first for 4 years up until 2015 in the European League of LGBT rights, has now fallen to 17th under her watch?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I completely reject the honourable gentleman's assertion. I have come to the floor of the House for an SI, which is actually unusual for a Secretary of State, because I think it is important that members across the House have an opportunity to ask questions. I am not afraid of anybody on the opposite benches. I'm not afraid of a single one of them, because I know that they do not take this seriously. The honourable gentleman asks why, or the right honourable gentleman, I should say, asks why is it that we have fallen? It is because self-ID is something that we differ with in opinion with other countries. It's a fact. We are different, but just because other countries believe that self-ID is the way doesn't mean that we in the UK have to do what everybody else is doing.
Ian O'Brien.
The issues of gender recognition and self-ID that my right honourable friend is working to clarify are increasingly an issue in amateur and professional sport, where the risk of serious injury to women and girls, and also examples of unfairness. Does my right honourable friend agree that, in general, for most sports, it is safer and fairer to separate on the basis of biological sex?
I do agree. Certainly in the majority of physical sports, it is fairer and safer to separate on the basis of biological sex. And it is crucial that sporting bodies understand their responsibilities to women. A poor understanding of equalities law has it's led to women like the pool player Lynn Pinchers having to take legal action to ensure fair competition in their sport. Girls often fear being physically injured by biological males and enduring rather than speaking up about the abuse because they are scared of being called bigots. And this is what I would say to people across the House, that calling people transphobic and calling them bigots when they express concerns is creating a chilling effect. I had a group of school children, teenage girls, who I had in my office, who told me about how because of mixed-sex sports, they are bullied and pushed around, that one of them talked about her glasses being broken because the boys are using the opportunity to bully. We should think about children. We should think about protecting them. So I disagree with the labelling of anybody who has a different opinion as transphobic. That is what is causing the problems in this debate, and I am determined to bring some light rather than the heat which they continue to generate.
Christine Jardine.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just say that I actually agree with the Secretary of State. Labels of any sort of people in any part of this debate are unacceptable, and we shouldn't indulge it. The Secretary of State also said that this is an important decision. I agree with that also. It's an important statement. She also said it had to be evidence-based. I completely agree with that. So could she perhaps tell us which organisations in this country concerned with LGBT rights and with human rights generally she consulted in this statement, and what their response and recommendations were?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She is right. We did carry out extensive consultations, but remember, this is something which we do repeatedly and periodically. The fact that we have not carried this out since 2011 shows that we have been remiss in our duties, and that is something that I am fixing. And one of the issues that we have is that a lot of people do not understand the law where it comes to self-identification. We are providing clarity there. We have engaged with numerous LGBT groups, but the fact of the matter is that many of them support self-ID. That is not this government's policy. Stonewall does not decide the law in this country. Whatever it is that people want to campaign on, we will listen and we will hear. But we have been very clear about this. We have been very clear about this. And this is something that we are not budging on, and we are updating the law in accordance with government policy, and we will continue to do so.
Miriam Cates.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement, which provides some much-needed clarity, because self-ID does threaten the dignity and the safety of women and girls, and she's absolutely right that the UK should not recognise GRCs from countries that operate policies of self-ID. Yeah. Sex matters in life and in law, and it's right that the UK has our own rigorous processes to gain GRCs, but these safeguards don't apply to the process of changing sex markers on passports and driving licences, which are of course far more commonly used for identification in everyday life. So will my right honourable friend look again at the Passport Office's 2021 review and decide whether or not we can stop this self-ID by the back door through driving licences and passports?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it is a good one. It is one of the things that came to light as we looked at government policy across the board, and it is an example of how the law needs updating. The reason why we have that is not because the government supported self-ID, but it was because before the same-sex marriage law came into being, we wanted people to be able to change their legal documents so that they could get married. Now that we have a law that has fixed that, we should look again at some of the measures which we brought into place earlier on, which are no longer needed. And that is one of the reasons why I think she's right to raise that. It is a Home Office issue, but I will raise it with the Home Secretary and see what it is we can do to repair.
So Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will say this as gently as I can. I feel today, as a gay man, less safe than I did 3 years or 5 years ago. Why? Sometimes because of the rhetoric that is used, including by herself, in the public debate. I'm afraid we're not able to have a debate. Let's have a debate. I'll be very happy to debate. I'm just making that point, that many of us feel less safe today, and when people over there cheer, as they just did, it chills me to the bone. It genuinely does. So I ask her two very simple questions. First of all, how many people does she think today's decision will affect? Precise number. And secondly, she will know that there are lots of people in the UK who have entered into same-sex civil partnerships and marriages who would like those to be recognised in other countries around the world so that they can live their lives wherever that may be. What has she done since she's been in power to make sure that more countries recognise those same-sex civil partnerships and marriages?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I will also speak very gently to the honourable gentleman. He says that my rhetoric chills him to the bone. I would be really keen to hear exactly what it is I have said in this statement or previously that is so chilling. But I would tell him what chilled me. In May 2021, against official advice, I will stress that officials said you should not have this meeting. I met a young lady called Kira Bell. She was a lesbian. She was a lesbian who told me the horrific experience that she had in the Tavistock clinic. It was an eye-opening experience. I know that the member for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath talked about transing away the gay in his speech in Westminster Hall debate. We are seeing, I would say, almost an epidemic of young gay children being told that they are trans and being put on a medical pathway for irreversible decisions, and they are regretting it. That is what I'm doing for young LGBT children. I am making sure that young people do not find themselves sterilized because they are being exploited by people who do not understand what these issues are. And I am saying this on the advice of clinicians. I'm saying this on the advice of academics. There are clinicians from the Tavistock who have been whistleblowing, talking about what these issues are. The honourable man tells me that he is traumatised. We are traumatised by what is happening to young children, and we are not going to run away from this issue any longer.
Ranald Drywadena.
Speaker, like millions of people across this country, including the LGB Alliance, I'm concerned by the erosion of hard-won rights of women and girls, not least the right to female-only spaces. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that we need a coherent policy across the whole of government, across every single department, to make sure that we are protecting female-only spaces and making that as a core commitment ahead of the next election?
I do agree, and I do agree that this has to be across the board in government, and some of this work is actually already underway. But I think it goes far beyond that. This cannot be a left or right issue. This cannot be an issue where certain people are personally invested in their own campaigns and cannot see the other point of view. This needs to be something that we work together on both sides of the House. But if I am giving a technical statement and explaining our thinking, and members across the House are talking about how they're traumatised, this is not serious policy making. We need to be able to have a proper conversation, take the heat out of the debate, and speak properly as members of Parliament representing all of our constituents.
Neil Hanvey.
Speaker, it really infuriates me to hear people in this chamber speak about the LGBT community as one homogenous group. We are not one homogenous group, and there are many LGBT anti-people who oppose self-ID for obvious reasons. One of the issues that I'm deeply concerned about is that many public bodies have not been observing their public sector equality duty properly, and in some cases they have been erasing sex from legislation which is out with that duty. What action can be taken to make sure that legislation is fit for purpose and it matches all of the protected characteristics contained in the Equality Act?
The honourable gentleman is quite right to raise this issue. This is why I mentioned the work we are doing around clarifying the difference between sex and gender. As I said, these terms were used interchangeably when we originally legislated in this House, and that is creating some confusion in terms of understanding. But public authorities should aim for clarity in what they are doing. I know that many organisations, hospitals in particular, think that removing the term women is more inclusive. It really isn't. It is excluding. And I would say to them gently that if you are using phrases like chest feeding or removing words like mother from paperwork, from forms, you are not helping. You are actually making things worse, and you are providing more. You're providing confusion. And I'm going to be working with public authorities. The Minister for Women is also a health minister. We take this issue very seriously, and we will see what more we can do in order to provide clarity. Providing clarity is the key point.
Okay. Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, women's participation in sport is significantly lower than men. And we need to encourage more girls and women to participate in sport because it's good for their long-term health as well as their mental well-being. But we do hear stories, and I've heard stories in my constituencies, of women and girls being put off sport by the presence of males for safety, privacy or fairness reasons. Can I ask the Secretary of State what she is doing to encourage girls to participate in sport and to protect the integrity, fairness and privacy within women's sport?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is something which I have said it's crucial sporting bodies understand. They are responsible for managing the rules in this space, and quite a lot of them have actually updated their guidance in order to reflect this, but not all of them. But young women in competitive sports shouldn't have to just silently accept that biological men will always beat them and take their chances to win gold. Generations of women before them have worked really hard to ensure that women have a place in sports, and those who excel get the reward for that and are recognised. So the Equality Act is not a barrier to fair sport for women. It permits it and it even requires it. So I'll be working with my colleagues in DCMS. The Minister for Equality is also a DCMS minister, to ensure that fair sport is a right every woman and every girl can enjoy.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Secretary of State's commitment to evidence-based policy making and awaiting the outcome of the CAST review. She will be aware, like me, that the interim report of the CAST review stated that they'd heard from young lesbians who felt pressurised to identify as transgender male, and that's something that, as a lesbian, concerns me. But as well as evidence-based policy making, does she also think it's very important to be clear about what are and are not our obligations under international law? And does she agree with me that there's no international treaty to which the United Kingdom is a signatory which requires us to have a system of self-identification? The current system we have is legally compliant and is compliant with the ECHR. And while some people talk about self-ID as best practice, that is no more than an expression of their opinion. And does she also recognise that self-identification raises very real issues, not just for the safety of women and girls, but also for their privacy and dignity, and also for the rights of same-sex attracted people to freely associate?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my learned friend is absolutely right. Self-ID is something that impacts all of the things she's mentioned. I think we actually speak less about freedom of association and the impact that it has there. And it goes to the point made by the Honourable Member for Kirkcaldy, that we do need, in many respects, to separate sexual orientation from what we refer to now as gender identity, what is under the T. We have lumped them together before. That was helpful in many circumstances, but I've seen this issue arise in some of the other equalities work I've been doing around race, where we use the term BAME to lump lots of different groups of people together. And when that occurred, we actually missed a lot of information about what was happening within those groups. We need as much granularity as possible if we are going to serve both people who are LGB and people who are T. She talks about what work we're doing in order to stop lesbians from being made to feel like they have to be trans-identified males. I've asked the Equality Hub to do some work with the Lesbian Project, who I know are very interested in fixing this problem. But on the point of international treaties, she is absolutely right. And so much of the criticism about how we will fall in international standing is not evidence-based policy. It is not a good lookism. This is not a good look, and we probably shouldn't do it. That is not how we should be making policy. We should be looking at the facts, thinking very clearly about the outcomes we want, and acting accordingly. And that is the way the Equality Hub, under my leadership, will continue to behave.
Nick Fletcher.
Speaker, the Secretary of State for Education said that today that to completely stop children from being able to socially transition at school require change in equality law. Yet children who do socially transition can end up on a pathway to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and surgeries that leave them infertile, and which impact their bone and even their brain development. It's also tearing families apart up and down this country, and we cannot continue to let this happen within our schools. So I will be supporting my right honourable friend's bill this afternoon before she lays it in Parliament. But will my Secretary of State also meet with concerned colleagues across this House to change this law, to protect our children at school, because this is a must.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I should say I'm very happy to meet with members across the House on this issue, but I will stress that changing the law is not going to be easy. It is not going to be straightforward. It will need consensus broadly from across the House because of many of the issues which I have alluded to earlier. But to his earlier point around social transitioning, I think he's actually right. And it's probably worth me putting on the record what social transitioning is, because I know a lot of people may not necessarily be clear about what I'm referring to. Social transitioning is a relatively new phenomenon. It is rooted in gender identity theory, which I must stress is a very contested ideology. The term is often used to refer to a range of actions that a child may take to appear more like the opposite sex, accompanied by an expectation that they will be treated as if they are. This may include requests for a child to change their name, pronouns associated with them, uniform, or use different facilities from those provided for their biological sex. Not all of these requests will comply with legal duties on schools, in particular to safeguard children. Social transitioning is not a neutral act, as it has been recognised that it can have formative effects on a child's future development, which is what he's alluding to when he's talking about cross-sex hormones. We are taking this very seriously. We will have the gender questioning guidance out very shortly, and I hope it will address many of the issues which he is concerned about.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend the Minister for her wisdom in her answers to all the questions here this morning. Will the Minister confirm that, similar to the fact that at 16 years old you can have a full driving licence in the United States of America, and yet you would not be able to apply for a full licence in the United Kingdom until our legal age is attained, and that this is the same premise in operation, and that our laws supersede other nations in this sovereign matter? In other words, decisions are made here by our Minister and our government.
And not Stonewall.
Yeah.
I do think that we need to make sure that there is clarity across the board, that it is ministers in this country who are making those decisions very clearly and being held to account in Parliament as well. There are a lot of loopholes, I think, that have become apparent that allow people to change things through different means than via Parliament. Some of that is in changing the colloquial meaning of actually quite a lot of expressions. So bringing as much as possible into law to provide clarity, I think, will be really important.
Sir Conor Burns.
Yeah. Could I invite my right honourable friend to agree with me that despite some of the rhetoric we've heard in the House today, the United Kingdom is an immeasurably better place to grow up as a gay person than it was in decades gone by, and that this House is at its best when it can find moderate consensus on what is right for our citizens. In that light, can I ask my right honourable friend if it is still the government's intention to bring forward conversion therapy ban legislation to this House? And if it is the case that the government intends to do that, will she give me, and through me, the House and the country, an assurance that we will put often confused, vulnerable and frightened young people at the very heart of that, and that evidence-based decisions will inform the legislation the government brings forward?
I'm very, very happy to confirm that. And can I please thank my right honourable friend for the very measured tone in which he asked his question. It is a model, I think, for members on the other side of the House. There is so much that we have done, even under this specific government, even under my watch. A lot of the work that we've been doing around our HIV action plan, around trans healthcare. We've established 5 new community-based clinics for adults in the country. There is a lot that we are doing. So it is wrong to characterise us as not caring about LGBT people. It also sends the wrong signal to our international partners. If they feel that we are not doing well, it is not because of what we're doing, it is what members across the House are saying. But Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may, the right honourable gentleman asked a question about conversion practices. Can I just give a little bit more clarity about what it is we are doing? This is a longer answer than normal, but I know that this is a matter of deep interest across this House, so I would like to address my thinking fully. A commitment was given to publish a draft conversion practices bill for pre-legislative scrutiny. I am determined to meet this promise, as I know is the Minister for Equalities. Attempts at so-called conversion therapy are abhorrent and are largely already illegal. So what a bill would do is identify this as a particular threat to gay people and confirm the illegality of harmful processes intended to change someone's sexuality. In that time, since this bill was first promised, this issue has developed. Now, the threat to many young gay people is not conversion relating to their sexuality, but conversion relating to gender identity. Girls like Kira Bell, who were rushed onto puberty blockers by the NHS and had a double mastectomy, now regret the irreversible damage done to them. I believe that this is a new form of conversion therapy. Respected clinicians, like those who left Tavistock, have made clear they are fearful of giving honest clinical advice to a child, because if they do not automatically affirm and medicalise a child's new gender, they will be labelled transphobic. So whatever bill we do needs to address many of those issues, and that is why we are going to publish a draft bill.
Stephen Doughty.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a shame that the Secretary of State isn't making a full statement on the issue of conversion therapy, because it's indeed a concern of many members on the opposite side, and we'd like some actual facts, which she hadn't provided up until now. She also hasn't provided, Madam Deputy Speaker, the actual statutory instrument referred to in this statement. I don't see it lying on the table, it's not in the Vote Office, and it's not online. So we're not actually able to scrutinise the names of the countries. So perhaps from the dispatch box she could list the countries which are to be added or removed to the list. Perhaps she could clarify whether the United States and its member states is one of those, and whether or not she has received any diplomatic representations, indeed from the United States or any of the others whose status is due to be changed, opposing the decision which she's announced today.
Well done. Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I apologise to the honourable gentleman. As far as I was aware, I was told that the statutory instrument has been laid. So this is used to be. It should be that should have been the case. But all of the details that he has asked for will be provided in the SI. I'm not going to read out a long list of countries at the dispatch box, but I will say that I personally have not received anything from the United States. I haven't received any particular message from them, so I don't think that that is an issue.
Sir Simon Clarke.
Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for a clear and cogent explanation of why the government has taken the action that it has. Does she agree with me that as we seek to address this very sensitive, important issue, it is very important that we avoid the kind of language which we heard from the honourable gentleman for the Rhondda, precisely because it obscures the fact that we are trying to work in the interest of vulnerable young people in finding a legislative way forward which protects their interest, rather than sees them signposted, often prematurely, in a direction which is irreversibly harmful to them.
Secretary of State.
I completely agree with my right honourable friend. He said it far better than I could. Let's have the debate in this House, rather than having people out there have the debate, which creates the climate of fear that many people are referring to. But the harder they make it for people to speak honestly in this chamber, the worse the situation will get. So I would urge members across the House to please listen to my right honourable friend for Middlesbrough. The point he makes is really important. We in this House need to set an example. Shouting and barracking and calling people bigot and transphobic is not what is going to help LGBT people in this country.
Dame Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if the Secretary of State would talk about the implications if sex was defined in law as biological for those existing trans people. Would they then have to, in all public appearances, act as if their biological sex was the thing that they had to do? So therefore you would have trans men having to use female toilets and trans women having to use male toilets unless they had a gender recognition certificate. I'm genuinely trying to find out what the implication of what she's announced, without any papers before us, to look at and ask are.
The Honourable Lady asks a very good question. And the way I would explain it is that this is not an issue that we had before. I wish we didn't have to make these changes. But the fact is, many trans people were living their lives peacefully and with dignity until others started exploiting the loopholes. It is not trans people that we are trying to limit. It is the predators who are using the loopholes and giving the trans community a bad name. So what we are trying to protect is the example I used before, male prisoners going into female prisons while claiming that they are the female. We need to continue to provide clarity because many public authorities are confused. They don't understand. People should use the toilets for their biological sex in the vast majority of cases. In some cases, that will be very difficult. But we need to provide more clarity so that predators do not exploit the loophole. That is what we're trying to do. As I said, in the vast majority of cases. But what we're trying to do is to protect vulnerable people.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker, it's the first time I've commented on this issue. Recently, this concept called the gender-bread person was found on a school intranet in Ipswich, and it promoted the idea that biology doesn't matter, it's always about what's in your head. It was complete self-identification. It also promoted outdated gender stereotypes. It had a list of hobbies and jobs associated with men and women. So presumably, if you like football, somebody might talk to you and say, well, actually, have you thought about actually being a boy, which is completely regressive. Does the Minister agree with me that there is no place for a gender-bread person in schools at all? And does she also agree with me that in primary schools we should be incredibly careful about promoting anything to do with gender ideology?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend raises a very good point, and it is one of the things that I am seeking to resolve. Because we have not provided clarity in the law, a lot of the space has been filled by many dubious organisations producing very, very dubious materials with no basis in biology, in the law whatsoever, but they're pushing it because they think that they get away with it. I think we as a government have a responsibility to clear out this material from schools. I think the Secretary of State for Education is looking at the materials that are being taught under RSHE, but it is very important, I think the point he makes is very clear, that primary school children in particular need to be protected. That is why the guidance we're going to be putting out on gender questioning children is going to address this issue, except in the most extreme safeguarding cases, and I expect that to include clinical advice. You should not be socially transitioning any primary school children at all or introducing them to this theory.
Leonici.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for coming here and making this statement, because my constituents' fear has been that there's been such aggressive activism with regard to this that actually it puts not only gay and lesbian people in real danger of hate crimes and different activism going on, but also to protect men, boys, women and girls, because my biggest fear in all of this is that actually we have self-identifying men in particular who will actually cause confusion for women who still do not have equality, especially with regard to health treatment and making sure that they are safe in single-sex spaces.
I think my honourable friend is quite right. We need to make sure that we are providing accurate data, and hospitals in particular, but loads of public authorities across the board know exactly who it is and what they are dealing with. We've seen examples, for instance, of people not receiving the right medical care because they were wrongly identified as the wrong sex because of possession of GRC or a self-declared difference in sex or gender. We need to make sure that that is not happening. We've seen issues across the board. The ONS is again looking at the census which it carried out to see what it can do to make things clearer, because it was quite obvious that many people who completed the census did not understand the question. And that is what we're trying to say, that this is a new space, a new area. Lots of things are developing. We should not be rushing to legislate. We should be legislating very carefully. That is why many of the things people have been expecting are taking time. We're waiting for the CAS review, but we will carry out this work.
Jonathan Lord.
A few years ago, a loving, caring, intelligent, thoughtful married couple came to me in my surgery, very distressed, because they just found out that their child had been questioning their gender at school, and the school for several months had not informed them. This child had been counselled by 2 adults who had no appropriate qualifications at all. As we seek clarity on the law and the guidelines here, can my right honourable friend reassure me that parents will be informed and included in those conversations, except in the most extraordinary circumstances?
I can confirm that. That is exactly one of the things that I wanted to make sure we saw in the guidance for gender questioning children. It is absurd for such a significant change to be taking place without parents knowing what is going on. Yes, of course, in the most extreme circumstances, that may not be possible, but the vast majority of parents love their children and care for them. We should not treat parents as the enemy here. They need to know what is going on, because quite a lot of the time, gender questioning children have comorbidities. Perhaps they are autistic, perhaps there is something else that is going on in the mental health space that needs clinical advice rather than just put on the pathway for social transition.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for giving us this reassurance that this government remains committed to protecting women's rights, protecting children with policies that are based on biological reality and not extreme ideology conflating sex and gender. And does she agree that today's statement will help stop people finding loopholes around this?
Secretary of State.
Yes, I do agree. The purpose of this SI is to provide clarity. The law has not really been updated since 2011. We need to be more frequent in terms of making sure that we're keeping up with what is going on in this space. The SI, just in answer to earlier questions, the SI was laid at 12 p.m. I'm sorry that it is not ready. That it is not ready for members, but that is exactly what the legislation is intended to, and I do agree with my honourable friend.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As someone who spent their entire professional career working in state secondary schools as a teacher, the one place where debates around gender self-identification should never apply is with children. And just like the divisive critical race theory that we've seen enter our school, we're now seeing the equally divisive gender ideology too. So can the Secretary of State outline for my residents in Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk that her announcement today will help to seek to clarify and make sure the classroom is a safe space for vulnerable young people?
I really welcome the intervention by my honourable friend. As a teacher, he knows how carefully we need to look after children and make sure that we are safeguarding across the board. That is quite right. This legislation, this SI, is just one step that we are taking in order to provide clarity. There will be more. There will be more coming. Not all of it will be legislative, but there will be measures brought to. There will be measures which will be bringing into place that will help people understand exactly what is going on. We should not assume that the knowledge that we have in this House is present in the population. I have met people who don't understand the difference between being gay or being trans. The Honourable Lady is complaining that my answers are long. It's because I want people to hear the truth and to understand what it is that we as a government are doing.
James Daly.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It seems that the main feature of countries that have come off this list is in their adoption of laws which remove all safeguards that exist around changing gender. Does my right honourable friend agree that this approach is dangerous, and what further steps is she taking to address its expansion?
I thank my honourable friend. I cannot control what it is that other countries do. All we can do is emphasise what our own policies are. We do have conversations with international counterparts across the House. There has been actually a lot of interest in what we are doing. I remember speaking, I won't name the country, a minister for another country who said that they had brought in self-ID early in theirs because they thought we were going to do it, and they were thinking again. There are actually countries internationally, even in Europe, who are taking steps to limit this because they're seeing the consequences and they don't think that the benefits outweigh the disbenefits. And I'm glad that we in the UK are setting a standard for evidence-based policy making and showing others how to get this right.
Point of order. Relating to the statement.
I will take the point of order relating to the statement because I think the Secretary of State might be able to clarify it. Point of order, Stephen Dowd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And further to the point I raised in my question to the Secretary of State about the information that hadn't been provided to the House, I do have a list here which appears to be a list of countries and territories which are changing status as a result of the statement and the order that's being laid, but it doesn't appear to have been published or available in the Vote Office. And it includes a large number of Australian states, Canadian provinces, United States states, including including Colorado, New Mexico, New York City, New York State, and other places, and actually a number of European countries, Malta, Mexico in Latin America, Luxembourg, many other locations. I just wondered if the Secretary of State could confirm for the House's interest whether that list is correct or not.
First of all, could I just say, I believe that the Secretary of State did confirm that the order has been laid and it should therefore be available in the vote office, but the Secretary of State might like to confirm that, or to say that she might, if she does not have the information immediately available, that I'll be able to report it back. Secretary of
Madam
State.
Speaker, I'd like to confirm that it has been laid. I've just heard from officials that it has been laid.
We will ensure that it is available in the vote office.
It was laid well before the statement to the House. I'm sorry it hasn't been published, but it was laid, so we have done our bit.
I think the Secretary of State has confirmed that it was laid. We will find